At nearly 9 kilometers above sea level, the air is so thin that every breath feels like trying to drink through a straw with holes in it. On Everest, climbers step into a world where the body begins to shut down. Not in days or hours, but minute by minute. This is a place where oxygen isn't just comfort, it's survival. And survival comes at a cost. On the slopes of the world's tallest mountain, oxygen is worth more than gold, and sometimes it's the only thing standing between a triumphant photo at the summit and a frozen body that never makes it back down. Imagine paying over $50,000 for the privilege of suffering in the cold, then realizing you still have to shell out thousands more just to breathe. Sounds insane, right? Yet every year, hundreds line up, strapping on masks and hissing tanks, hoping their oxygen lasts longer than their strength. Everest isn't just the ultimate climb. It's the world's highest casino, where the chips are your oxygen bottles and the jackpot is life itself. At sea level, we don't even think about breathing. It just happens. But on Everest, every breath is a negotiation with nature. By the time you've reached base camp at over 5,000 meters, the oxygen in the air is already cut in half. At the summit, it's down to just a third. You're still inhaling, but your lungs are pulling in little more than whispers of air. Climbers describe it like living in slow motion. Adjusting a strap on your helmet feels like running a marathon. Even chewing a piece of chocolate can leave you gasping, as if you just sprinted 100 meters. Your body is desperate, not just for energy, but for oxygen to fuel the brain, the muscles, even your heartbeat. Without it, you're not just tired, you're starving for breath. One climber put it bluntly, "Up there, you're not living. You're dying. You just hope to do it slowly enough to reach the top and get back down." And that's why supplemental oxygen isn't a luxury on Everest. It's the thin line between becoming another success story or another statistic. When climbers push into the higher camps, the lack of oxygen turns Everest into something more like a slow-motion nightmare. Your brain begins to fog, your decisions lose their sharpness, and even resting leaves you breathless. It's no wonder this stretch of mountain is called the death zone, because above 8,000 meters, your body isn't acclimatizing anymore. It's shutting down, cell by cell. In 2023, a climber from China collapsed at nearly 27,000 feet when her oxygen ran out. Frostbite was already eating into her fingers when another team and their Sherpa stumbled upon her. They gave her their own supply and carried her down. She lived, but barely. Others that same season weren't so lucky. Now, most of us would think if the air's that thin and death is so certain, why not just stay home and binge a survival documentary from the couch? And that's fair, except climbers will tell you that standing on Everest is a dream worth the suffering. To them, that hiss of oxygen flowing into a mask isn't just air, it's hope. It's the sound of one more step closer to the roof of the world. There's a reason climbers whisper the words, death zone, with such weight. At around 8,000 meters, Everest becomes more than just a mountain. It becomes a countdown. With only a third of the oxygen available at sea level, the body begins eating itself alive. Muscles break down, organs weaken, and the brain struggles to make sense of even the simplest tasks. Judgment, the one thing you can't afford to lose in a place like this, becomes clouded. A climber might see the summit just a few hundred meters away and push forward, not realizing they no longer have the oxygen to get back down. Many never do. Shauna Burke, who reached the top in 2005, once said, "Your body is breaking down and essentially dying. It becomes a race against the clock." And she's right, because the death zone isn't conquered. At best, you borrow a few hours from it and you pray it doesn't demand repayment too soon. Even standing still feels impossible here. Imagine holding your breath underwater, surfacing gasping, and then being told, "Good news, only 1,000 meters left to climb." That's Everest in the death zone. In 2019, the world saw just how cruel the death zone can be. Photos went viral of climbers standing in a traffic jam, a human line snaking along the ridge to the summit. Hours of waiting at nearly 29,000 feet with oxygen hissing away, every minute eating into their survival. Some made it, others collapsed in place, their bottles empty before they ever touched the top. That's the terrifying truth of Everest. The mountain doesn't always kill with avalanches or storms. Sometimes it kills with silence. A clogged trail, a stuck regulator, a simple delay. When you're already dying by the minute, just wait a little longer can be a death sentence. Reinhold Messner, who became the first to reach the summit without oxygen, described the experience as standing on the edge of human possibility. He called it his greatest achievement, but also admitted he knew he was gambling with death. And while we admire that level of grit, let's be honest, most of us struggle just climbing the stairs with groceries. Imagine doing it while your brain is slowly shutting down. On Everest, even tying your boots can feel like rocket science. Now, if oxygen is the lifeline on Everest, you'd think it would be handed out like free coffee samples. But no, up here, every breath comes with a price tag. A single oxygen bottle costs between $500 and $600. And you don't just need one. A typical climber will go through 5 to 7 bottles on a standard expedition. Add in a mask and regulator, that's another $2,000. Suddenly, you're spending $3,000 to $6,000 just to breathe. And that's before you even start climbing. Getting those bottles up the mountain is a mission in itself. They're heavy, bulky, and each one has to be carried by Sherpas across ladders, ice falls, and ridge lines, where a single misstep could send everything, oxygen and all, tumbling into oblivion. Even filling the bottles is expensive. They can't just be topped off at a corner shop. The oxygen has to be purified to extreme levels because even tiny impurities can freeze at high altitude, turning your lifeline into a useless block of ice. Imagine paying $500,000 for a bottle, only to discover it's the mountain equivalent of a paperweight. And here's the kicker. It's not just your oxygen you're paying for. Most climbers also provide bottles for the Sherpas, the men and women who do the heaviest lifting on the mountain. Without them, most expeditions would never make it past base camp. Supplying oxygen for yourself and your Sherpa can easily double the cost. Guides often call extra bottles cheap insurance. Mike Hamill, one of Everest's most experienced leaders, says having spares can mean the difference between life and death. A delay in weather, a faulty regulator, or simply running out too soon can turn your dream summit into a disaster. With extra oxygen, you can climb faster, stay warmer, and most importantly, survive long enough to enjoy the view. So yes, climbers end up spending thousands of dollars just to keep breathing. It might sound outrageous, but on Everest, oxygen is more valuable than Bitcoin in a bull run. At least Bitcoin won't keep your brain from shutting down at 28,000 feet. Climbing Everest isn't just a physical challenge, it's a financial marathon. The average cost of a Southside expedition sits around $45,000, but that's just the starting line. Western companies can charge up to $90,000 for a single climb, promising better logistics, higher Sherpa ratios, and more comfortable base camps. Meanwhile, some local operators will take you up for closer to $35,000. Same mountain, wildly different price tags. And here's the irony. All that money doesn't make Everest safer. Storms don't check your bank balance before rolling in. Avalanches don't care if you paid a premium for a Western guide. Even with the best gear and most experienced team, once you're in the death zone, your fate often comes down to the weather, your health, and how long your oxygen lasts. It's a strange reality. People spend the price of a luxury car or a down payment on a house for the privilege of freezing, gasping, and risking their lives on the side of a mountain. And yet, year after year, the demand doesn't slow. If anything, Everest has never been more crowded. Part of that money goes where it should, to Sherpas, whose wages and insurance have improved over the years, though many argue it's still not enough given the risks they take. These are the climbers behind the climbers, hauling oxygen, fixing ropes, and breaking trail. Without them, Everest would be almost empty. With them, more people than ever are reaching the top, and sometimes more people than the mountain can safely hold. Still, no amount of money erases the fact that Everest is dangerous. The death rate on the mountain hovers around 4%, which might sound small until you realize that means roughly 1 in every 25 climbers never comes back. Compare that to Annapurna Y, where the fatality rate once soared to 32%, and suddenly Everest starts looking like the safer option. Safe, of course, being a very relative word when your lungs are slowly shutting down. And maybe that's the strangest part of all. We've turned the deadliest real estate on Earth into a business, a place where companies sell survival and climbers buy their shot at glory. If the mountain could talk, it might say, "Thanks for the business, but don't expect a refund." For decades, Everest has been a theater of triumph and tragedy. Some stories are celebrated as miracles, others are remembered as grim warnings. Take 1978. Reinhold Messner and Peter Habeler did what was once thought scientifically impossible. They summited Everest without bottled oxygen. Doctors had insisted it couldn't be done, that the summit's atmosphere could only support a human being at rest, not climbing. They were wrong. Messner described those final steps as moving in a dream, every breath like sucking air through a cloth. He called it the greatest achievement of his life, but it came with a haunting truth. He knew he could have died at any moment. Fast forward to modern times, and the mountain's dangers look very different. In 2019, a photo shocked the world. A human traffic jam stretching along the Hillary Step just below the summit. Hundreds of climbers crammed onto a ridge barely wide enough for one. They stood waiting in line at nearly 29,000 feet while their oxygen bottles hissed away. Some made it, others collapsed, their final moments spent standing in that frozen queue. This is Everest in the 21st century, the highest peak and sometimes the highest priced waiting line in the world. Only here, running out of patience isn't the problem. Running out of oxygen is. The 2023 season was one of the deadliest Everest has ever seen. At least a dozen climbers lost their lives, and 5 more vanished, their bodies never recovered. Among them was a 50-year-old Chinese climber who collapsed at 27,000 feet when her oxygen supply ran out. Her hands were already frozen solid when another team found her. Against all odds, they gave her their own oxygen and dragged her down the mountain. She survived, but the frostbite left its permanent mark. Others that season weren't as fortunate. The death zone rarely shows mercy twice. And yet, these stories of disaster are part of what fuels the mountain's strange allure. Survivors return home as legends. The fallen are remembered as cautionary tales. To climbers, Everest is both a dream and a gamble. They know the odds, they hear the stories, and still they line up each spring. It's easy for us, sitting comfortably on the couch, to shake our heads and say, why risk it? But for the men and women who stand on that summit, it's not just about climbing a mountain. It's about touching the edge of human possibility, about proving, if only for a moment, that they can breathe where life itself is almost impossible. Of course, some might argue there are safer ways to feel alive, like karaoke. Sure, you'll embarrass yourself, but at least you won't run out of oxygen halfway through Bohemian Rhapsody. Not everyone agrees on how Everest should be climbed. For some, bottled oxygen is simply part of the modern expedition, a tool that keeps climbers safe, helps Sherpas do their work, and gives people a fighting chance in the death zone. But for others, those hissing tanks are nothing more than cheating. Reinhold Messner, who made history by climbing without oxygen, argued that bottled air dulls the raw challenge of Everest. To him, reaching the top with tanks was no more impressive than running a marathon on roller skates. Extreme? Maybe. But his point struck a nerve. Even today, a small number of climbers attempt the summit without supplemental oxygen, often at great personal risk. They see it as the purest way to meet the mountain, man versus nature, nothing in between. But purity comes with a price, and on Everest, that price is often fatal. Edmund Hillary, who first reached the summit with Tenzing Norgay in 1953, once said, "It is not the mountain we conquer, but ourselves." For many, that captures the spirit of Everest. It's not about how you climb, but about the personal battle within. Still, the debate continues. Should climbers carry their own bottles? Should they even use oxygen at all? Sherpas often remind outsiders that while purists argue about cheating, they're the ones hauling those bottles through icefalls and storms to keep clients alive. For them, oxygen isn't a philosophical debate. It's a practical tool that means they come home to their families. So yes, oxygen may blur the purity of the climb, but it also saves lives. On Everest, where the line between courage and recklessness is razor thin, most climbers would rather be called cheaters at the summit than heroes who never came back down. And honestly, if cheating means breathing, I think most of us would gladly break that rule. I mean, imagine telling your lungs, "Sorry guys, today we're going authentic." That's not bravery, that's suicide with extra steps. For anyone dreaming of Everest, the mountain demands more than money. It demands preparation. Training at high altitudes before you ever set foot in Nepal isn't optional. It's survival practice. Climbers who arrive without serious acclimatization often find their bodies betraying them halfway up, as altitude sickness takes over with headaches, nausea, and crippling fatigue. Budgeting properly is just as critical. Oxygen alone can cost several $1,000s, and you'll need to plan for both your own supply and your Sherpas. Too many climbers cut corners, only to realize that saving a few $100s on extra bottles isn't bravery. It's a shortcut to disaster. As seasoned guides like to say, oxygen is your life insurance policy on Everest. If you're serious about reaching the summit, plan like your life depends on it, because it literally does. Extra bottles are more than just backup. They're a safety net for the unknowns. Maybe the weather shifts and you're forced to wait an extra day at the South Pole. Maybe a regulator fails. Maybe you misjudge how much air you'll need for summit day. Having those spare tanks can be the thin line between walking back into camp with frost on your eyelashes or not walking back at all. And know this, Everest doesn't care about your pride. If you push without oxygen or skimp on preparation, the mountain won't clap for your boldness. It will simply take what it always has, lives. For all the drama, Everest is still climbable. Thousands have stood on its summit, but the ones who come home to tell the story are usually the ones who trained hard, respected the risks, and yes, paid extra for the air they needed. Think of it this way, buying extra oxygen on Everest is like paying for extra legroom on a flight, except instead of comfort, what you're really buying is the chance to stay alive. And let's be honest, on a mountain where tying your shoelaces feels like a triathlon, you'll want all the breathing room you can get. So what is the real cost of Everest? It's not just the price tag of an expedition, it's not just the $3,000 worth of oxygen bottles or the $50,000 you hand over to a guiding company. The true cost is measured in risk, in preparation, and in the knowledge that no amount of money guarantees your safe return. Every climber who steps into the death zone makes a bargain with the mountain. Some return home with a summit photo, frostbitten fingers, and a story they'll tell for the rest of their lives. Others stay behind forever, their bodies frozen in the snow, silent reminders of just how thin the margin for error really is. And yet, year after year, Everest draws people in. Not because it's easy, not because it's cheap, but because it represents something we all feel in our bones: the urge to test ourselves against the impossible. George Mallory, who vanished on Everest in 1924, gave the simplest answer when asked why he wanted to climb the mountain: because it's there. In the end, that's the paradox of Everest. It takes lives, it demands fortunes, it shatters families, and still it calls. And for those who dare to go, oxygen isn't just a bottle strapped to their back. It's the sound of hope hissing through a mask, the promise of one more step upward, and maybe, just maybe, a chance to stand on top of the world.